So welcome. Happy to have health center folks as well as our former legislators joining our webinar this afternoon with WIPGA. Everyone should have control over your own mute and video settings, but please do, for our attendees, please mute yourselves. The chat will be available for our questions and comments, and we should have some time for a Q&A today. As you can see, our session is being recorded, and I'll just be sharing it out with health centers afterwards, not, pushing it out in, big publication. So it's just for health center folks to learn if they were unable to attend. Today's session is a part of our learning series in advance of our state in-person advocacy day, which will occur in Madison on April 2nd. We'll also have a few other webinars. I'm doing like a How a Bill Becomes a Law, the Schoolhouse Rock style session in March. And then we'll have an overview of the political situation also in March with our contract lobbyist, Tony Langenall from Michael Best Strategies. For anyone I haven't met before, I'm Rochelle Andre. I am the Associate Director of Government Relations here at WIPGA, the Statewide Association for Community Health Centers. And for today's webinar, I'm hoping that our attendees can walk away with a good sense of some of the inputs into how decisions are made in the state capitol, maybe some tips for effective engagement with policymakers, and then just feeling empowered. What is the impact that constituents can have for their elected officials? And to do that, we've invited two former lawmakers to share their experiences. And I know that they're really candid folks, so I'm excited to get their kind of post legislative experience in front of you all today. So I'll just do some brief intros for them so you know who we're talking with. First, we have Donna Rozar. Donna is a retired cardiac medical and surgical clinical registered nurse, taught from 2008 to 2016, and then from 2009 to 2020 as a clinical nurse educator with Marian University College of Nursing and the UW-Eau Claire. She served in the state assembly from 2021 to 2025, representing the 69th Assembly District, Marshfield area. She was the chair of the Family Law Committee, vice chair of the Health Committee in her last term, and she also serves currently on the Wood County Board of Supervisors and also chairs the Human Services Committee, so a lot of health experience there, both as a clinician and as a policymaker. And I'll note that Donna last session was also the lead on the Medicaid postpartum extension bill and really fought to dislodge that one with leadership, which we could talk about today. Evan is also with us. Evan is an attorney, former state public defender, and the current city attorney for Milwaukee, elected not even a year ago yet, April 2024. He was originally elected to the state assembly in 2012, so had a significant tenure there, served on the very important budget committee, the Joint Committee on Finance, and also served on a board for Community Health Center as a patient and advocate in Milwaukee. So, while our guests here today hail from different geographic and political corners of the state, I've invited them both because they're really wonderful supporters of community health centers. They're also really direct communicators and really both dedicated in different ways to improving the health of their community. So I think that we'll have a really interesting and insightful conversation. So I've prepared many prompts for them, but also want to feel welcome to engage in more of a freewheeling discussion, and then have time for Q&A. So as I noted, please do add your questions or comments into the chat if you'd like, and we can always circle back on those too. Donna and Evan, anything in your background that you feel like I missed? Donna, let me know if there's anything you wanted to add before we dive into some discussion, and Evan the same.
Well, you'd be surprised at how many times I wrote that postpartum bill down in response to some of the questions that you posed for us. So I'm glad that you noted that we will talk a little bit about the dynamics of that bill over the last 3 years. So
Sounds good. Evan, anything else for context?
No, I'm ready. Let's jump right in.
Okay, cool. So, Evan, maybe I'll start with you. You served in the legislature for a long time. How did you originally get interested in running for political office, and why'd you run, and what is it like to typical day of a lawmaker? What does it look like?
Yeah, I grew up in a very political household. My father served in the state senate out of Oshkosh before I was born and became a lobbyist the year I was born. And that meant I wanted to do anything but become a politician growing up. And I went into law and went to law school to become like an environmental lawyer. I was going to sue big bad polluters. And then really in law school, I in love with being in the courtroom and doing trials. And in the world today, that's primarily in criminal law. So I tried to be a DA and worked in the DA's office my final year of law school and didn't get hired in Milwaukee, got hired as a public defender. And that process and that job really inspired me to run. I had this ingrained idea about public service and running for office because of my childhood, but I didn't have a why. Like I didn't understand what I would do if I ran, and being a public defender and getting exposed to the criminal legal system really was all of a sudden it was like, okay, there is a lot of work to be done in the state legislature to make this system better, fairer, more effective. And basically I represented primarily young Black men with similar charges and similar backgrounds, and it felt like I was on a hamster wheel and nothing ever really changed. We weren't winning. The community wasn't safer. And so I got mad and decided to run. One, one of the things I liked about serving, I did 12 years in my tour of duty, and no 2 days were the same. I loved that legislators, you could pick up a new issue when you wanted. So as was mentioned, I'm still a patient of Progressive Community Health Center in Milwaukee. I have to go in Friday. And so wish me luck. I'm grumpy about it because I have to do labs, which means I can't have coffee and whatnot. But anyway, I'm doing it. I liked that I could work on that issue and criminal justice system. Like what? It was weird. I could both be a nerdy lawyer and care about sentencing and prisons, and then also work on getting health centers a $2 million grant in the state budget process. So the days are never the same. Spend about half your work days, maybe a little bit less in Madison. Those days are usually really busy, lots of meetings, committees, debates, etc. And then the non-Madison days are, reminding people that you're alive and that you're a good person so you get reelected, and building community relationships. So coffees and listening sessions and tours of businesses and whatnot. And a little bit of, it was kind of hard to predict. And I'll wrap up my comments here by just saying each legislator is different. Each legislator handles their schedule differently. My life changed when I became a dad, and then all of a sudden I reserved some time on Fridays to be a dad. And some legislators have businesses that they run or where they work, and so they reserve time to have a private sector career. And so everybody runs it a little bit different, and there's no rules about it. It is really up to the communities that elect their representative, and that necessarily made a really diverse group of people that came together as a body of 99 with totally different backgrounds and priorities. But I do miss the sky's the limit on what we got to work with, and that was always intellectually stimulating and fun for me.
And while you served, were there a lot of other folks with a legal background in the legislature? Evan, is it pretty common or less than people would
No,
think?
it's a dying breed. I think this year it's the record smallest. There was like 13 when I started and 9 when I left. And I think this year there's like 5 or 6 lawyers. And, one of the challenges in Wisconsin, and Donna, I don't know how you feel about this. It's a part-time job, but not if you really want to be good at it, and not if you want to have influence and raise in the ranks. It's like a 80% job. And there were years where I tried to practice law outside of being a legislator, and I felt like I was failing at both. And I never really made enough money practicing law that it made it worth it. So I stopped that in probably 2016. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to recruit professionals, especially those in the core years of their life that have pressures like a mortgage and a car payment and kids, because you don't make a ton of money. It's not no money, but it's like it's not part-time. It's like part-time plus, and you don't. My last gripe about it was I was in the minority party for all 12 years of my service, which meant I never had any control over when things got scheduled. And maybe Donna didn't get to tell Robin Voss when a committee was hearing anyway, but I felt like, if Tuesday there's a session, you got to be there. And that's it. It doesn't matter if your family wanted to go on vacation, you could leave, but you'd pay the price of missing votes and not being plugged in.
Thank you, Evan. A lot of rabbit holes I want to go down there, but let me turn over to Donna first and understand what prompted you to run and what you saw as a typical day, if any, in the legislature.
Well, I've been interested in the issues that have been played out in the political arena for a long time. And so in 1999, the District 2 representative on the county board called me and asked me if I would run for his county board seat because he didn't want to run anymore after 10 years. And so in 2000, I got elected to the county board. And, as a nurse, got involved in the Board of Health and Human Services and things. So spent a lot of legislative days down in Madison with the Wisconsin Counties Association, and just really found that environment to be intellectually stimulating. And it was something that I could talk to people about my heart's desire about some of the issues. And then Bob Culp called me in 2018. He had served 6 years as the 69th Assembly District representative, and he did not want to run again. And he knew of my interest in politics, and he called me and asked me if I would like to run for his seat. Of course, when there's an open seat, there are other people that would like to run for his seat. So I was in a four-way primary that I won pretty substantially because my name ID in the community was pretty high. And so I worked real hard that summer. If you remember, that was the summer that life shut down. And it was an easy summer to run because you had no parades. There were no Dairy Fest breakfasts. And I just did doors. And, some people slammed the door in my face, and there were a couple of signs that said, "We're quarantined, please don't come to the door." But it was a fairly easy year to run. And then I ran again, and then I got redistricted out of my district, which was very disappointing to me because I loved what I was doing in Madison, and to be redistricted out was very sad. A typical day, I think Evan did a really good job. I'm a pretty hands-on person, and I think my staff found that, well, we should be doing that for you, Donna. Why aren't you doing that? But as a nurse, I was a hands-on person, and so I was used to doing things myself and taking care of my little team of patients. And I kind of saw the 69th Assembly District as my responsibility to just kind of take care of them. Evan did a good job with explaining. We have a lot of committee meetings. Lobbyists come to see us. Advocacy groups come to see us. We have constituent calls that we make, and we meet with constituents. We obviously have a staff, so we have to have a staff meeting to make sure we're all on the same page about how we're going to run the office. The thing that I really liked, and I know that Evan was in the minority during the time he was there, but every department has a legislative liaison that is appointed by the the executive branch of government. And I found those people to be very, very helpful. So when I had a constituent problem, or I had something I needed to run by somebody, I would call those legislative liaisons. And Zach Madden, who is in the governor's office, I got along with those people really well. And I found that they were helpful. It didn't seem to me that they cared what side of the aisle I was on. They wanted to help solve problems. So I really appreciated the legislative liaison, and I did spend quite a bit of time on the phone with them because they were very helpful. Because one of my favorite parts of my job was constituent services. And so when people called with issues, sometimes it was just a frustration with dealing with the bureaucracy of government, which can be so overwhelming for people that aren't there. And it was really it really made me believe that I was doing a good job because I was able to help people navigate that bureaucracy of government and help them to solve. Sometimes the problems were difficult, sometimes the problems were simple, and but that was a large part of my days. We were usually in Madison Tuesday through Thursday during the session, and then on Mondays and Fridays, like Evan said, people can be more flexible. I enjoyed meeting with constituents when I was back in district, and fielded a lot of phone calls, and just really enjoyed those days, both in and outside the Capitol as the state legislator.
What are some examples of those constituent issues that you feel like you were helpful on? I'm thinking, I sometimes direct a clinician to a legislator on a licensing question, and the legislator can, dislodge that issue or direct you where to go to get the right form, things like that. What other constituent issues crossed your radar that are memorable?
Well, I'll go first, Evan, if you don't mind, because I will share a story about a licensing situation. We were having some issues with people getting licenses. And one day I got a phone call from somebody, and he was an athletic trainer. And he had a job offer, but he couldn't get his license from the Department of Professional Services. And they were going to withdraw his job offer because he hadn't gotten his license. And so I was able to help him get his license so that he didn't lose that job offer. But the funniest licensure situation that I had was, we had a physician who was having a hard time getting his license coming out of medical school. And so I got a call in my office, and he was very frustrated because he wanted to start applying for jobs and stuff. And I couldn't understand why he wasn't getting his license. So I called the liaison at that office. And while I was on the phone with the liaison, this physician's license popped up in his email. And he had like not gotten it for 5 months. And it was like, oh, maybe I do have a little power here that I can get something done. But I will never forget that. And I got this email, my license just popped up in my inbox, and I'm still on the phone with the legislative liaison. So they were some of that. They were two examples of what I did that I felt I made a difference.
And that's just purely on kind of assisting someone. There's no policy or laws or, regulations that you're really working on there. Which I think sometimes people don't think of as part of that role, as triaging some of those constituent issues. Evan, anything coming to mind in particular?
I was getting coffee the other day, and the barista recognized me, which is not to say I'm recognizable in this community, but we had helped him with an unemployment compensation claim during COVID. And there were many people that had frustrating experiences with that system, and his was one of them. And we kind of, like Donna's story, it's just trying to unstick a file through the bureaucracy, but it mattered, and mattered enough that he remembered it 4 years later. And so it's things like that. I got a lot of letters from people that were incarcerated in prison and jails, to tell their stories, or from their loved ones to tell their stories, given the work that I was doing on criminal legal reform. And so and frankly, beyond just the transactional, of I'm writing because I need help with this issue, taxes or a license or workers' comp, or unemployment comp. I think people really enjoyed just feeling heard for their position on a given issue. And so a lot of the interaction was just listening to what was important to individuals, and giving some recognition that their input mattered. I enjoyed talking to my favorite constituents were the Republicans that I got to get into it with, and why all right, you got me. You want me to support this issue? Make your argument. Why should I buck my party and adopt your position? I loved those debates and discussions, and I think people value feeling heard, even if the outcome is not exactly what they were hoping for. And I enjoyed making sure that most of the people, not all, but most of the people in the district were at least heard if they wrote in or called in.
I bet people were often surprised if you would have that conversation with them. I imagine maybe a constituent who perceives you're of the opposite opinion would assume you're not going to give them the time of day. So, I
Oh,
mean,
it
I've,
totally disarms them. It was,
right,
and I won every one of those arguments because obviously I was right. But
of course.
I would say over the years, some mistakes that I learned, I gave my personal cell phone out to too many people. I have a couple of frequent flyers that would call a lot, and I have one guy that still comes over to my house sometimes and drops off little notes and things. And so it's varying degrees of involvement. I had a Republican constituent. We got breakfast 3 times a year to just check in. And I said, look, don't call my staff and complain about the state of politics. I'll get some eggs with you every so often on a Friday morning, and you can complain directly to me. And it's actually, someone I consider a friend.
So one day I was in the office and my staff leaves at 5 o'clock, and I sometimes worked until later than that. And the phone rang and I thought, oh, should I answer it? So I did. And I, answered. I said, Representative Rozar. And the person said, oh my gosh, you're answering your own phone. And I said, well, my staff is gone and I'm here working. And I said, I might as well. And we had like a 45-minute conversation. I can't even remember what the issue was, if you want to be honest about it. But I just remember her saying, oh my gosh, you answer your own phone. And so I think people like that personal touch. And I think Evan and I were both individuals that enjoyed those personal relationships.
That is definitely my impression of working with both of you. Um, Speaking of relationships, we've got folks on the call here who probably, they're in some sort of maybe an outreach or a communication role for their community health center, maybe even a board member, or maybe someone who's just a clinician who has never talked to a policymaker in their whole life, maybe is a little freaked out about doing that. And I'm urging them to be comfortable sharing the issues that are important to them, in the context of community health centers. How do you, Donna, I'll start with you. How do you suggest either an organization or a constituent in particular gets that relationship started? Because, your time is limited, there's a lot going on. What do you recommend? Is that just, reaching out with a letter? Is that an invitation to come and see what they're doing? How do you recommend that someone begin that work with you as a legislator?
Well, I think it starts in district. I always enjoyed meeting with people in district. Sometimes you meet people for the first time in the office, and then you arrange a tour of their business or of their facility. And you know that I've been to the community health center here several times in Marshfield. But you know, when I was going over this question, I wrote down a couple of things. Be personable. I think Evan and I were both very approachable. I don't think that anybody was ever afraid to approach either one of us. And so, you'd never want to be adversarial. And so I was thinking about those Republicans that would call Evan to talk to him. And I had Democrats that called to talk to me too. But, it was counterproductive to start yelling at me or, questioning my sanity for voting for something. And I'd think, well, this is not a conversation I want to have with anybody else. So I think that if you can carry on a civil conversation, I don't think either Evan or I are people that want to be confrontational with anybody. And so, both of us appreciate civil conversations. I had a couple of people that were pretty condescending to me. And I thought, what in the world? As if you're stupid and you don't know anything. Well, I've had a pretty storied career, so don't make me feel like I'm stupid. And so, approaching somebody in an attitude that honors both of the people in the conversation would be good. I always felt that it was good to build relationships outside the building. And so, whether that was in district or grabbing a cup of coffee at, um, the old fashioned or something like that, some way to just connect. Yeah, I mean, with me, you kind of get what you get, and I'm not going to play any games with you. So I think like Evan said, in the assembly there was such a diversity of people down there. I mean, I had people tell me that legislators lied to their faces and things like that, and I thought I would never do that to anybody. I just kind of was maybe too honest and black and white. But I think that you have to kind of determine what that personality of that legislator is, and then if you want something from them, you need to be as congenial as possible in order to present your case. But I think most legislators just like to be approached as a person who maybe can get something done for them. Yep.
My advice is do not be weird. Just talk like a normal human being or how you would to your coworker. So if you're not a creepy coworker that it's very normal. So and enter with the expectation that on this initial blind date of meeting a legislator, we will not fall in love immediately, and just be normal and kind of start from scratch. Donna said a lot of what I agree. I agree with a lot of what she said. The way to get support is not through the first 3 paragraphs of the 1-pager that you will be sent into the office with. And while I appreciate that the green bean industry contributes $15 million to the state's GDP and employs whatever, I don't care. That's not what I'm going to remember. I'm going to remember the guy that's like the green bean farmer and his family that's been on the land for 90 years and blah, blah, blah. So you're going to put in your 1-pager, WIPCA will do it for you, of all the patients that you serve and the payer mix and how much value and blah, blah, blah. That's great. It's great. That's great. I don't care. I care about the human story and the humanity. Like I am a patient of a health center today because of a conversation that I had touring in 2013 as part of a legislative visit, and I met staff that I wanted as my healthcare professionals. And it wasn't a song and dance. Look, that clinic was terrible. I mean, I don't know if we have any Milwaukeeans on the call, but it was like the old progressive clinic. It used to be a bank. The lab to do a blood draw was in an old vault, and there was like an accordion. It looked gross. There was leaks. It was awesome. And I was like, this is where I fell in love with the mission and the people. So when you meet with lawmakers, be normal, don't be weird, and then tell us the why, give us the passion. It's patient stories, it's provider stories, it's not a pie chart about how much you give back in the blah, blah, blah tech, blah, 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 blah. I mean, we will remember the people and the story and the narrative, and that gets us the hook. And then it's easy to be for a grant for health centers because we are associating positively with the people that make up these, the people you work for, the patients you serve, et cetera.
This is a really important conversation. There's a great question in the chat from Bella about stories versus data. And something I hear you talking about, Evan, is that the need for that hook. Why should I care? What help me understand this from a constituent perspective or from something that's going to appeal to me specifically as a legislator. And I will say there are plenty of folks who their first question is going to ask, what's it going to cost? So there are, people come from all of these different perspectives, but unless there's a hook to what does it mean for my district or for me, according to what I'm passionate about, it feels like a pretty uphill battle to, continue that work. And it's easy for community health centers because we serve patients in every single district in the state. That's a hook. We're providing care for your constituents, people who are your neighbors. Donna, I'm wondering about that from your perspective too. Are the data components the fiscal, or is it the stories and the relationships that really stand out in terms of, what you're going to engage on?
Well, I'll just share one story with you. When my first term in the state legislature, we have budget buddies. Evan was on JFC. I guess on the other side they have budget buddies too. But I was in the majority, obviously, and so Mark Bourne, who is the co-chair of the JFC, was my budget buddy the very first time. And as a cardiac medical surgical nurse, I had seen what a lack of dental care did to people. So I had some stories about patients that had come in with poor dental hygiene with endocarditis, and I have some pretty dramatic stories about patients that we took care of. And so I was fighting, as you know, Rochelle, very hard for an increase in dental reimbursement for the Medicaid community. And we did get an increase in reimbursement that first year I was in the state legislature, and I was very proud of those efforts. But I remember when I was sharing these stories with Representative Bourne, and his staff was saying, well, I didn't know that. Well, I didn't know that. And I felt like as a nurse, I had a unique perspective coming down there. And I'm disappointed to say we don't have a nurse in the state assembly now, which I'm very disappointed about. But I felt like my ability to share a story from my real life experiences made a difference with that reimbursement, with the dental increase in reimbursement in the dental. And so I'm a storyteller. I just was in Madison last week testifying on a couple of bills that I'm still kind of cleaning up from last session. And I brought somebody down with me who wants to get a little bit more in the legislative process, had never met the lady before. She showed up at my doorstep at 6:30 Wednesday morning and rode down. And I said, now I'd really like you to critique my testimony. And she said, I really liked how you told the story. And I thought, I'm good with that. I can tell a good story. And that why that you all are talking about is very important. Why was it important for us to increase dental reimbursement for Medicaid patients? I feel the same way as why is it important to extend postpartum benefits to the Medicaid population? So I tried all the time to tell a story of why it was important, and I appreciated when my constituents did the same thing with me.
Can I just add, I mean, there is a time and a place where you need to have the fiscal details ironed out, because you are not able to get millions of dollars for your cause because you came in with a cocktail napkin that had some zeros on it, right? You have to do your homework. And as the effort gets more and more real, the importance of that homework gets more and more increase. But let me say this, there is no room in which all 99 of us show up and agree, like, what should we do postpartum Medicaid expansion? Like, it is not ruled by consensus. There is a structure and a hierarchy, and there is control in both parties. Even in the minority, there's control over what meets the press conference and what sees the light of day and what doesn't. And so what you're really doing with these visits, and why I think storytelling is the place to start, is you're really trying to identify a champion that will be relentless in the closed door meetings to get the money or to get the policy change. And there is a $2 billion budget or $1.8 billion budget. There's room. There's the money is there for the cause if you get the political will. And it is not a consensus driven process. You need someone, and because the health centers are a network of organizations that do not have the resources to play directly into the political process by writing big checks and hiring, big fancy political action committee or conduits or whatever. You need 5 dedicated, annoying, relentless lawmakers like Donna who go into the closed room and leverage and say, I want this. I want the $2 million health center grant program in the budget. That's my ask. And then, as the deal making goes, as you're meeting with lawmakers, you guys, and I say this in rooms like this, you're the CIA to go in behind enemy lines and identify champions that will be ruthless and dedicated to your cause. That means collectively you'll meet with 90 people, and 80 of the 90 will feel like they didn't directly connect with the story, or you report back, you're not sure, does Goyke really believe in the mission of the health center? And then you'll have 10 that give you intel back up to WIPCA, and then you do follow-up with them, and the 10 become 5, and that's the army you need to get stuff done in the Capitol. 5 relentless, annoying, semi-organized lawmakers that won't shut up till they get their $2 million. And trust me when I tell you, they will find the money to shut you up if you're a loud enough champion. Is that fair, Donna?
That is fair. That is fair.
With
But
some exceptions, with some
I
exceptions.
was going to say, you know that there are exceptions to that, because we both have examples of significant bipartisan support and organizational support where one person can say no. And that's very frustrating when you know that things are well supported and yet you don't have forward progress on a bill. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about Medicaid postpartum because I think there's a good example here, but there's a wonderful question in the chat first. Eric asks, if I talk to a representative and they're on the other side of an issue, should I keep going? Should I be annoying them, or should, in a non-weird way, or should I stop? How do I know, where that communication is going to be effective? And, I guess maybe could you characterize this as like let's talk some really political issue, like, let's say we're having a conversation about abortion, like that's probably in a different category than something that's less of like a culture war issue, but maybe that, doesn't have so much politics involved. What would you recommend for that individual? What's a good use of their time? Evan, what do you think?
I don't think it hurts with the final clause of that comment of not being weird, and take to heart Donna's earlier commentary about not being condescending or rude or judgmental on it. So when a bill comes up for a vote, there are discussions behind closed doors in the Republican caucus and the Democratic caucus about how the body's going to handle the bill that day. And sometimes we're required to have what's called a roll call vote, where all 99 have to press the button, yes or no. And there are other votes called a voice vote, where we all just grumble yay or nay, and the yays always win because it's kind of preordained. So the continued advocacy, even if your lawmaker is on the opposite side, can still matter. Like if I'm hearing the pressure from folks, and I know I'm on the opposite side of the issue, and we're caucusing about it, it might be in my best political interest to have a voice vote on that particular bill. And what happens in a voice vote, and remember, we are single-minded seekers of re-election. So with a voice vote, I am not on record as a yes or a no. The body as a whole just kind of adopted through verbal, grumbling and yelling, the policy. That's wonderful. If I can find a way out of making you very angry with me, I will take it. And you would, on a day, if we debated 100 bills, it's probably likely that 60 to 70 of the 100 would pass on a voice vote. And I don't know, Donna, if in closed caucus, the Republicans would talk about it, but we as Dems you would hear members saying, "Oh, I'm getting calls about it," or "I know, I know this person, Bella's called me 3 times on it, and I'd really not like, if I don't have to disappoint her." And so it could matter. And not that you get on the calendar, you're probably good, but I'm telling you, if you don't have vocal opposition, it's golden. It also might help you in a later process with a veto, or how the bill is seen by the other chamber, or the assembly did a voice vote, which means nobody's really on record opposing it, which means the Senate If there is opposition, that opposition is less strong or organized. So I'd say keep doing it in a nice, non-weird way.
Evan, let
So
me ask you, just because it's a little inside baseball, real quick. Like you just used the term caucus. I think that folks may not know what a caucus is, in this context. Could you just explain, how
Yeah.
that functions?
So like once in a while, or especially before we all get together and vote in the big room on the floor, we will meet in private, just the Dems, just the Republicans, and it's essentially the room in which the agenda is set, which bills move forward, which do not. Are there enough votes for supporting a position on a bill? Does the bill need to be amended to get more support? Obviously, in the majority caucus, with the Republicans, it's actually setting the agenda, so deciding which bills will actually go onto the onto the floor. And for us in the Democratic caucus, it was a bit of who's the best messenger in support or opposition. Do we do amendments? Are we going to highlight parts of the bill that we object to more than others? How do we handle our opposition? Do we do written or television? Do we drive to Illinois and live there for a few days like happened a decade ago, right? This is those type of kind of logistical discussions happen in closed session and then are executed on camera when we go out to the floor for the, pageant or the play.
yeah, and those meetings are called caucuses. So the Democrats caucus and the Republicans caucus behind closed doors. So when you hear somebody say, "Oh, this will be discussed in caucus," that's what happens, is that you've just got Democrats and Republicans meeting in separate rooms behind closed doors.
And I think that's a good point too. Sometimes I'm sharing with folks that, by the time something is getting into a vote at committee, let alone on the floor, everyone's made their decisions, at that point, 99% of the time. I'm sure there's some exceptions there, but, people learning about an issue and figuring out how they're going to vote on it or how they're going to engage on it is happening behind the scenes. And a lot of, frankly, what we see in the media, or if you're, watching, is, part of the, I guess I will use the word theater that happens around kind of politics and policymaking, but it's the stuff that's happening in those conversations with constituents, with advocates, and behind closed doors. That is where I think most of the complexity is occurring a majority of the time.
And occasionally, when I would meet with a lobbyist or an advocacy group, they would say to me, "Would you be willing to bring this point up in caucus?" Because, like Evan said, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where the discussions take place about priorities and different things. And so sometimes people just wanted the point to be heard in caucus, that it was a different opinion, maybe there where leadership was going, or where they thought the final was. And so a lot of things are brought up in caucus that never see the light of day in the media.
So you're talking here about some of that development of priorities. For each of you, what are the factors that you included in your decision-making process about how to make those decisions? So, for example, I think of this in a model in terms of knowing about something, and then you maybe care about something, and then you champion something. So maybe you're like okay with it, but you're never going to go out on a limb and, make it your priority. What are some of those factors that influenced how much you engaged on an issue? Donna, so maybe you could use Medicaid postpartum as an example. How did you grab that as, how did that come to you as a topic you really wanted to proactively and pretty assertively engage on?
Well, years ago in another life, I was an OBGYN nurse practitioner. You probably did not even know that, but a long time ago, that was one of my roles. And then I was a nurse practitioner for a family practice group one time, and I saw a lot of maternal kind of issues. I'm also pro-life, as you know. And so when Amy Loudenbeck left the assembly, she was the initial author of the postpartum extension bill. And when she left the state assembly to run for a state office and did not come back, that was one of the bills that I felt needed to get further discussion. So I talked to my staff and we actually picked up that bill from Amy. I called Amy on the phone and I said, what do you think about that? And she gave me some background. And I really looked at that bill, and my passion became for that bill for two reasons. Number one, I am so tired of, as a pro-life person, being told that I don't care about babies after they're born. And I just got tired of hearing that. And I believed that looking at this postpartum extension bill was a way of saying, I do care about babies after they're born. And the best way to have healthy babies after they're born that I don't want to be aborted is to have healthy mothers. Um, I have not delivered a baby, but I adopted two babies from a hospital. So I know what it's like to take care of a 2-month-old. I didn't have I wasn't a postpartum mother, but I could not imagine somebody who gave birth to a baby and then 2 months later, which now is the 60 days, where our postpartum is, trying to decide what I was going to do about changing health insurance. And so I thought, there are all kinds of issues that can help them postpartum. As a cardiac medical nurse, I have taken care of people with cardiac postpartum cardiomyopathy. And so I knew that there were issues that could happen there. As a medical nurse, I understand about diabetes and hypertension. So as a nurse, I understood the postpartum depression and all the medical issues that could happen. Going back to the data, we do look at the data and we see that there are postpartum complications up to 365 days. And it just made sense to me that this was a good bill to pursue. We've already mentioned the huge bipartisan support that we had for that bill. What were there, like 75 organizations that signed on to that bill? So it was very frustrating to have that bill pass in the Senate 32-1 and then not even be able to get a public hearing. As you know, Representative Moses, who's chair of the Health Committee, put it on a public hearing and was told to take it off. And that made me so mad because Clint was getting pressure to hear that bill, and to be told, no, you can't hear that bill, was just, you have got to be kidding me. Somebody has that much power with all this support, and it makes you cynical really fast, Rochelle.
Well, and as you're referencing Donna and Evan, you said this too, there is a hierarchy, among, these chambers. So, I think that's a tough reality. I think, we've got 37 new lawmakers in the building here, and I'm interested to understand, what they make of that hierarchy because it exists in all, areas of the legislature. Um, but what do you think? I mean, I think Medicaid postpartum is a really unusual one, and this is one where, Speaker Robin Vos has been very transparent about, thinking it's not the right direction to go, and a lot of folks are trying to change his mind on it. But, how much do you think that politics is a component of the policymaking process? I mean, I don't have a calculation I'm looking for, but does it weigh into most of the decisions happening in the building or less than we think? What is your assessment of that, Donna? And then Evan, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that too. And then just so folks know, I want to open up the room for discussion after that. So just
Yeah,
how much is politics playing in?
yeah, I'll just make a real quick comment because I'm sure Evan's got an opinion on this. But it was very frustrating to me as a state legislator to hear words like, well, this is a good messaging bill and we know it's going to be vetoed, but we're going to put it forth anyway. We know this bill's not going anywhere, but we want to message it. Those kind of things just really upset me because I believed that a bill was a really good bill, but that would be a hard vote for me to take. And that's where some of the voice votes come in. But the other thing that bothered me is that bills were put forth or pulled back because who's going to get the credit for this? We don't want we don't want this person to get the credit for bringing forth a good idea. So we won't bring it forth until there's a change in the executive branch or something like that. Now, and Evan will agree with me, probably 92% of the bills that we pass in the state assembly were bipartisan and did get bipartisan support. But those hot button issues just get so much press. And there are politics in some of those less than hot button issues too. But they were two things that ideologically didn't set well with me. Who's going to get the credit? And then let's put out a messaging bill. I'm anxious to hear Evan's opinion on that. So, yes, I would say politics plays a huge part in what happens in the legislative branch of our government.
You know, they are politicians, so political is in the name. And Donna is right. There appears to be a scale that it's, you know, it's the more, I don't know, it's almost the more meaningful and impactful, the more political. Like, you can run a pretty good feel good bill if you wanted to do, I'm picking on green bean growers. I don't know why I picked on them, but like, if you wanted to do a license plate that supports whatever, blah, 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 feel good, a stamp, name a highway after somebody, like, there's very little resistance to the type of legislation that really is not going to change the government's bottom line, or while it's meaningful and symbolic, it isn't really shifting public policy. So the more you go, like the bigger it gets, the more, and especially when there's more money at stake, this comes up all the time in the licensing turf war and scope of work turf war that annually happens in the medical field and dental and chiropractors, of who gets to practice and get licensed. And because there's money at stake, what happens is, you know, associations are assembled, and the counter association is assembled on the other side, and then the docs and the hospitals and they get tangled up in the political warfare over the turf of a license or a scope of practice. That happens every year. So I think it's omnipresent. It's defeatable. What is heartbreaking? It's heartbreaking. I mean, postpartum's an interesting one because the politics are so overt. It's one of the things I did like about Voss, is he was always very honest, and he stabs you in the front and not the back, although he will also stab you in the back. He just stabs people. Is what I hated, and I have a couple of examples in my career where you do all the work and you get it all aligned, and then for no good reason, something that you could not have predicted that's happening over here impacts over here, because a senator screwed me over on my bill, and this is my time to take a pound of flesh back. And it's like, or a new interest group arises with a complaint. They never came to testify. They never registered on the bill, but 2 weeks before the damn thing's going to become law, now they've got a problem. Oh, it is really frustrating, and I do not miss it at all. That aspect of stuff, you know, you do all the work you can as a lawmaker, and it gets ripped in a different direction because of somebody else.
I appreciate that candor. Thank you both. Let me just put the question to our attendees here. Feel free to drop any questions or comments in the chat, or raise your hand if you want to ask Donna and Evan anything. As folks are thinking, in the meantime, Evan, I'll ask you, did you ever work with a Republican on a bill and then have them introduce it so it would get moving through the legislature?
Almost exclusively. If I had a bill that I thought could become law, I always had a Republican in front if I could. It was not uncommon that I would do it first. And a bill that I spent 10 years working on that still is not passed involved a new procedure, a much more humane procedure for people to go back to court to wipe clean a criminal record from when they were younger. And I did it by myself in 2013 and I think 2015. And then a Republican, through a constituent phone call, a kid got fired because a new employer did a background check. And the guy walks down the hall and says, I know you're a lawyer. I heard you've been working on something. How can I help this constituent out? And I said, I got a bill for you because your constituent has no legal remedy unless we make a law change. And that was, I don't know, 7, 8 years of a partnership. But yes, put the Republican first. I was always trying to have a garage sale of good ideas. And there was always tension there because you got to give up some ownership and you got to give up some of the, you got to have a non-perfect bill as I see it as a big city liberal Democrat. I had to bring an attitude that I was willing to make changes to my own idea.
I think that's an important insight into how the building works because there's strategy on who's leading on bills and to set things up for success. And I think that there is more bipartisanship happening, not necessarily visibly, but behind the scenes on a lot of topics
I
where people are
was
looking for
I was
consensus.
much more successful in passing legislation under Governor Walker's tenure than I was under Evers. It was much harder to have a Democratic governor. Like my job was harder with him in office than with Walker. Um, and in part it was the position of the legislature. It changed all of a sudden. Instead of, the Republicans were looking in 16, 17, and 18 for bipartisanship, and now there was a bit of a defense against it. But it was really hard. It is there. It does happen, but it takes a ton of patience to be willing to wait and work with somebody else. I mean, I think for those of you on this call that are political novices, Barb, go into this work with a historical lens, and your idea is probably not going to pass in 2025. Work in 2025 for it to become a reality in 2027. And if you have a longitudinal view of that you're not going to get to yes immediately, that's a really healthy, set your expectations low so that they're met when things happen. The idea doesn't happen overnight.
Well, leave us with a positive, Donna, if you will. And then Evan next, one thing that you miss about the legislature and one tip for our advocates that we haven't addressed yet. One thing you miss and a tip.
Well, when I saw this question at the end of our prep work, I thought, you're not going to find hope in who sits in any of these seats. So don't, I don't know if that's a positive or a negative. I'm just telling you, your hope should not be in who sits in any of those seats in Madison, whether you're in the judicial, legislative, or executive branches. But I will say that my favorite part of being in the legislature was working with people like you, Rochelle. Evan and I were on opposite sides, but I think we always spoke to each other when we saw each other. I had a good working relationship with his father, who was still a lobbyist. It is sad because I did work with some Democrats on some bills, and then I got dinged for it in the primary that I had to run. And so, people think, well, don't you want people to work kind of in a bipartisan way? And yet it can be used against you if you work in a bipartisan way. So I remember I asked Bob Culp why he only served 6 years in the state legislature. And he said, I saw cynicism in my rearview mirror and I thought I'd get out before it caught up with me. And I thought, maybe it only took me 4 years to get that cynical, but I was disappointed not to be reelected. And I really miss the people. I miss the process and the people, but not the politics. So I'll give you 3 Ps: the people and the process I loved, the politics I hated. And we've alluded to that many, many times. But I still have good relationships with people down there. And so
Right, you're working on bills right now, Donna. So for all of the naysaying, you're in the mix.
Yeah, that I'm willing to work with. But it, it the hope might be in just continuing to be engaged. You don't want to just roll over and play dead and let the water run downhill. You want to try to build a dam. You want to try to put your finger in the hole in the dam. There are things that you need to do. And so being engaged, developing relationships, being persistent, it's so important to just keep on going, and then be engaged and work as an educator on issues that you're passionate about.
Evan, closing thoughts?
Well, the hope rests in the vast power of state government to positively impact the lives of the people of the state of Wisconsin. And the patients and members that come in and out of the clinic depend on that positive intervention, whether it's how they get to the clinic or how they pay for the services or how the clinic's paid for the services, to the food that's on their table at home or the school their kids go to. I mean, it is.
How many
I,
green beans they have
the
access
green
to?
bean farmers need you. You know, I miss the breadth of policy that I got to work on and the vast ways that state government could better help people. I tell when I'm asked, I mean, the biggest single issue for me is the eradication of poverty. And I find it to be the largest injustice that I see in my neighborhood in Milwaukee. And I don't think it's very far from Donna's neighborhood in Marshfield either. And it's something that all health centers encounter, given the patients that you all are on a mission to serve. And you know, it serves us all in our best interest to help those folks climb the ladder and find stability and peace and happiness and health in their lives. So, you know, I have seen great things happen that cynical members of the legislature thought impossible. I've been a part of some of those projects, and I've had my heart broken more times than I've had victories. But they're out there, and we need you, and the patients need you. Frankly, those folks that are coming in somewhere throughout the state today on a cold day, someone got a special medical vehicle ride to a clinic so that they could address their diabetes, so that they could live an extra year of their life, so that they could see their granddaughter born, so that they could hold that little baby and give her the love that she needs. All of that is so beautiful and worth fighting for. And what's a couple phone calls to a lawmaker if you're helping that family find the happiness and health that they deserve?
Well, I'm glad we have that recorded because I'm going to put that on a bumper sticker somewhere and mail it to every single health center. So thank you both for your time, for sharing your insights and, you know, frankly, for your service in the legislature. You know, it's a challenging role in many, many ways, but I really respect both of you for, you know, the way that you've approached it and your work with constituents. So thank you for your time today. And to our health center folks, hopefully you feel excited. There are opportunities, and WIPCA is here to help motivate all of that forward together collectively for the state and for your patients. So thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we really appreciate your time. Donna and Evan, I'm sure we'll stay connected. Thank you.
Thank you.